In the village of Nyoka, where the sun rose golden and set in deep violet blushes, beauty was law. From the smoothness of skin to the symmetry of teeth, from the grace of movement to the way a person's eyes caught the light, everything was measured, everything mattered. They said the gods gave sight so people could recognize the divine in the world, and so the people of Nyoka worshipped beauty as if it were breath itself. Every year, as the dry season faded into the season of cool rains, the villagers prepared for their most sacred ceremony, the Festival of Eyes. It was said that on this day, the gods passed briefly through the eyes of mortals, judging the world through the vision of those who bore the gift of sight. Mothers dressed their children in robes made of dyed goat hides and cowrie shells. Girls painted their eyelids with powdered root and shimmer dust. Men shaved intricate symbols into their beards and hairlines. The elders wore white, each holding a polished mirror tied around their necks, reflecting the light of the rising sun toward the sacred shrine. The shrine itself sat in the village's heart, a dome made of sun-baked clay and bones, ringed with thin streams of smoke rising from sweet-scented leaves. At its steps stood the one figure more feared than the chief, the masked priestess. Her robe was stitched from the skins of many animals, and her mask carved of dark wood, with 3 sets of empty eyes, one closed, one open, and one shattered. She raised her staff and the village fell silent. "Today we thank the gods for the gift of sight," she intoned, her voice thick and distant like water behind stone. "We thank them for color, for faces, for fire, for beauty." The villagers repeated after her in rhythm, "For beauty." "But remember," the priestess continued, stepping down the shrine's steps, "what you see must be honored. What you steal from the innocent," her voice rose, echoing off the round walls of Nyoka's homes, "will return with vengeance." A gust of wind scattered ash into the air, and for a moment, the scent of something bitter, like charred feathers, swept across the square. At the edge of the gathering, sitting cross-legged on woven mats, was a girl of about 10. She wore no colorful robe, no beads or paint. Her skin was dust-smeared, her hair matted at the ends, and most striking of all, her eyes were covered in a long strip of dull gray cloth, bound twice around her head. The children gave her space, some whispering, some frowning. A woman tried to hush them, but even she glanced at the girl with quick, wary eyes. The girl said nothing. She did not turn toward the ceremony. But her head tilted slightly, as if listening to something beyond the words, beyond the priestess, beyond the sky. "They say she was born seeing too much," someone murmured behind clenched teeth. "More than the gods allowed." A gourd of water slipped from a boy's hand and shattered near the girl's feet. The water crept toward her toes, darkening the mat. She didn't flinch. The priestess turned, and though no one could see her expression beneath the mask, her steps slowed when her gaze fell upon the blindfolded girl. From beneath the veil, the girl raised her chin, just slightly. The wind stilled. A hush spread deeper than silence, like the moment before a snake strikes. And then the drums resumed, the festival continued, and people pretended not to shiver. But in the cracked corners of Nyoka, and in the hollow beats of its sacred drums, something had already begun to watch. Nyara was born under a blood moon, when the rivers ran low, when the jackals refused to howl. The midwives whispered prayers as they cut her cord, but none could ignore her eyes. They glowed even in the dim hut, not golden like honey or brown like river clay, but a strange shifting silver that caught the light like a blade. As a baby, she stared too long, too deep. Grown women felt their hearts clench when she locked eyes with them. Men looked away, uneasy without knowing why. "She sees through," they muttered. "Like smoke through thin skin." Her mother, Arifa, wrapped her close and did not speak of the eyes. She sang to Nyara instead, low, ancient lullabies whose meanings even she didn't fully understand. Songs about mountains that moved when no one was watching, about rivers that ran backward under moonlight. She kept the baby close to her chest at night, her hands trembling sometimes as she prayed. When Nyara was 5, she told her mother the chickens would not survive the week. By the 7th day, a hawk had carried away one, and a snake had slipped into the pen and strangled the rest. By 6, she stared too long at an old woman's face and whispered, "There's black inside her breath." 2 days later, the woman fell dead beside her cooking fire, clutching her chest. The villagers began to avoid her. Children were warned not to meet her eyes. Mothers pulled their little ones away when she passed. Her skin was clean. Her teeth were even. But beauty could not cover what made them fear her. It was in the silence that followed her, in the way dogs whimpered when she came near, in how fires dimmed in her presence, flickering not from wind, but from something else. Arifa tried to hide her. She pulled a cloth over Nyara's head when they went to market, kept her inside when visitors came, told her to look at the ground. But Nyara saw things even with her head bowed. Faces that flickered like candlelight. Shadows behind smiles. Threads of red light dancing around people's throats. Sometimes she wept without knowing why. At 8, she woke screaming. "They're coming," she cried. With fire and masks. Arifa held her tight, whispering urgently. "Don't look when they come. Close your eyes. No matter what. Promise me." Nyara nodded, shaking. 3 moons later, on the Festival of Eyes, Arifa died. They said she tripped while drawing water. That her head cracked against the stone. But Nyara had felt it the night before. The dreams had come again, red strings, a black wind, her mother's voice melting into silence. The village buried Arifa in dry soil, barely offering the girl a glance. She was left to sleep beside the cooking hots, wrapped in a raffia mat, eating from leftover pots. And yet, she still saw. At 10, she told the healer, "Your son will not return from the hunt." The boy returned that evening, blood on his legs, tears in his eyes. The tusk of a wounded boar had taken his best friend's life. By 11, they had begun whispering it openly, "Cursed child. She brings death. She sees what shouldn't be seen." When the next Festival of Eyes came, Nyara was summoned, not to watch, but to be judged. They brought her before the shrine at dawn. The priestess stood in full regalia, mask glinting in the firelight. The elders gathered in a half-circle, their robes heavy, their arms crossed. A boy played the flute, slow and mournful. The villagers came out to watch. Nyara stood silent. She wore nothing but a thin tunic and dust on her feet. A pot of sacred oil, pressed from the flowering sap of the ifruit tree, was brought forward. Normally it was used to anoint the mirrors of elders or bless the seeing bowls of diviners. This time, it was to destroy. The priestess did not speak. She dipped 2 fingers into the oil, then approached. "Your eyes are not yours," an elder said aloud. "They see too much. They steal what should remain hidden. This is a mercy." Nyara didn't flinch. The priestess pressed the oil to her eyes. It sizzled on contact. Smoke rose. Flesh hissed. The crowd flinched. Children cried. Women looked away. But Nyara did not scream. She only stood still. And when the oil was gone, when the smoke cleared, and her eyes were red pits ringed in burns, she opened her mouth and whispered, "Now I see clearly." The priestess stepped back, shaken for the first time in years. A crow flew low overhead, cawing once. Far off, the drums slowed. And the villagers could not speak, for something had shifted. Something had changed. They had taken her sight, but somehow, it felt as though she now saw everything. They left her at the edge of the forest as the sun began to set, where the trees grew too close together and the ground swallowed sound. No one spoke as they walked her there, no chants, no last rites. Just the distant call of a wood owl and the crunch of dry leaves under tired feet. When they reached the clearing, they placed her on the cold earth, turned, and walked back to Nyoka without a word. Nyara sat alone, her face burned, her eye sockets still raw, covered by a strip of torn cloth soaked in herbs in silence. Her hands lay in her lap, twitching slightly as the wind picked up, stirring the grass. The night came quickly. She did not cry. The forest was not silent. It breathed. It hissed. It whispered. Creatures scurried in the underbrush. Insects clicked like tiny bones. Somewhere, far off, something large moved, slow and heavy. Nyara turned her head toward the sound and smiled faintly. "I hear you," she whispered. She did not know when the hermit arrived. One moment, she was alone with her breath and the cold, and the next, there was the scent of smoke and bitter root. A hand, calloused and dry, touched her shoulder. "I thought you'd be bones by morning," came a voice like leaves rustling against bark. "But here you are. Whole. Breathing." She didn't answer. "I can take you back," the voice said. "But you will only be buried deeper next time." Still, she remained silent. "Or you can stay. But if you stay, you must learn not to see with your eyes. You must see with your blood, your breath, your bones." Nyara turned her face toward the voice. "Teach me." And so he did. The hermit never gave a name. He never showed his face. When Nyara asked if he had eyes, he laughed softly and said, "They were never mine to begin with." He lived in a hut made from woven branches and smoke, hidden behind a wall of thorns and stones. Inside, it was always dark, even in the day. There were jars filled with ashen feathers, strings of bones hanging from the ceiling, a mat made of bark and leaves. No mirrors. No carvings. Nothing that reflected. He spoke little. But he taught her much. He taught her to hear the way ants marched through grass. To feel the tremble of roots beneath the earth. To smell the change in air before rain. To sense the weight of silence when death walked close. He made her touch the ground every morning, her fingers spread wide, and ask, "What lives here today?" She began to know the forest like a second skin. She could tell which trees were weeping and which ones were angry. She could tell when the birds lied. She could tell where a predator waited just by how the frogs quieted down. But it was in her dreams that her true sight returned. She dreamed of people she remembered from the village, the butcher's son, the girl who used to spit near her mat, the priestess in her mask. But now, each one glowed faintly, thin red lines twisting around their bodies like vines. Sometimes the lines looped around a neck, or coiled near the chest, or dangled near the ankle like a waiting trap. And always, the line pulsed, slow, then faster, then still. She woke from those dreams with clenched fists, breath sharp. The hermit would sit by the fire and say nothing, only stir the pot. "What are they?" she asked one night. "Fates," he replied. "Threads. Death leaves its fingerprints long before it takes the body. You see them now." "Why me?" she whispered. "Because they stole your first sight. And now the second has come." She stood one night beneath the trees, the moon hidden, her face turned upward though she could not see the stars. The forest breathed with her. "I don't need eyes to see," she said softly, "to know one and to everything. I see what matters." A pause. The wind stirred. "I see what ends you." And the trees listened. And the forest shivered. She returned just as the rainy season began to pull its claws from the earth. The roads were still soft, the fields damp and breathing, and the people of Nyoka had begun to step out from their homes with cautious joy, shaking off the weight of long wet days. They didn't notice her at first. Just a figure at the edge of the market, wrapped in dark brown cloth, her face hidden behind a veil woven from dried reed threads. She moved slowly, carefully, as if measuring the ground before each step. But those who had known her, even if they didn't wish to, felt it in their bones. The tilt of her head. The silence around her. The absence of birdsong when she passed. Nyara had returned. She didn't speak to anyone. She stood near the spice stall, her hands folded in front of her. No coins in her pouch. No basket on her hip. Just a shadow draped in human shape. Whispers began as whispers always do, carried by breath and fear. She came back. Is it really her? She should have died out there. Why cover her face if she can't see? And then the butcher's son spotted her and laughed too loudly. He was broad-shouldered now, with a sharp tongue sharpened by years of easy meals and no consequences. His name was Bakery, and he had once thrown ash water onto her sleeping mat when they were children. He strutted over to her, holding a skin goat leg, his apron stained with brown. "You smell like forest rot," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "Or is that just your curse leaking out?" Nyara turned her veiled face toward him. Slowly. Bakery grinned wider, emboldened by the attention. "What are you here for, blind girl? Come to look at nothing?" She reached out, not quickly, not threateningly, and placed her fingers on his forearm. Her touch was light. Her hand cold. Bakery froze. "I came to see," she said softly, "what ends you." He tried to laugh, but the sound caught in his throat. Nyara tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something distant. "Your horse," she whispered, "will step sideways at dawn." Then she turned and walked away. He stared after her, suddenly unsure of how to hold his own weight. The crowd parted for her, silence rippling in her wake. No one followed. That night, the rains returned briefly, just enough to soften the ground again. By morning, Bakery's cart had to be dragged toward the field where meat was sold. The path was uneven, churned with old hoofprints. The horse, old but strong, hesitated just before the slope. Then, as if pushed by a wind no one felt, it stepped left, just slightly. The wheel snapped. The cart tipped. Bakery screamed once before the full weight of iron, wood, and butchered flesh crushed his ribs into the soil. By the time the villagers pulled his body free, his eyes were wide and unfocused, his mouth still shaped around a breath he never finished. No one mentioned Nyara's name. Not aloud. But it spread. From the field hands to the bead weavers. From the women who carried water to the hunters who drank beneath the baobab. They spoke of the veiled girl. Of the whisper. Of the death that came softly, like a shadow that had always been there. Some said she was cursed, that the forest spirits had filled her with vengeance. Others said she had been touched by the gods, returned from the edge of death to balance the scales. And still others refused to speak of her at all. "She can't see your face," a woman muttered near the fire one night, staring into her bowl of ground maize. "But she can read your death." From that day on, when Nyara walked into the market, the path cleared before her. No one touched her. And no one ever laughed. The rains had thinned. The ground no longer drank with thirst but held its moisture like secrets. The air was heavy with the scent of flowering trees and things rotting beneath them. In the quiet spaces between wind gusts, the people of Nyoka moved with unease. Too many days had passed since the butcher's son was buried. Too many glances cast toward the market's edges where a veiled figure sometimes stood still as stone. Nyara had not spoken again. She had not touched another soul. But still, the villagers felt watched, as if their own reflections whispered behind their backs. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped low and everything in the village turned the color of rust, she returned. The masked priestess. Her arrival stirred the village like a sleeping snake. No warning. No horns. She walked through the market with her staff striking the ground, barefoot, unbothered. The children hid. The elders straightened their spines. Her mask was the same, carved wood with 3 eye sockets, one open, one sealed, and one cracked like dried earth. Her robes swayed with the weight of charms, bones, and silence. But she did not go to the chief. She did not approach the shrine. She went directly to Nyara. The villagers followed at a distance, drawn and repelled at once, moths circling a fire they feared to touch. Nyara sat beneath the old fig tree near the edge of the village, her hands folded over her lap. She did not rise, did not flinch, though she heard the staff before it stopped before her. "You walk among the dying," the priestess said, her voice quiet but edged with something ancient. "But death walks with you." Nyara tilted her face upward. "Then we are no different." The priestess knelt, her bones cracking slightly as she lowered herself to Nyara's level. For the first time, her voice dropped the public tone, became soft, nearly human. "I warned them," she said. "The day they burned your eyes, I warned them. Sight taken unjustly becomes something else. But I did not expect this." Nyara said nothing. You see the threads, don't you? The priestess asked. Yes. Red, the priestess pressed. Nyara nodded slowly. Like veins stretched around them. Throbbing. Waiting. Each death you see, the priestess whispered, each one you allow, leaves a shadow behind your soul. They stack like stones. One day, they will crush what's left of your name. Nyara's fingers tightened slightly on her cloth. I don't kill them. No, the priestess agreed. But you see, and you say nothing. That is its own kind of killing. Silence fell like ash between them. I didn't ask for this, Nyara said. Her voice cracked slightly for the first time. The priestess reached forward, touching the ground between them. This gift you carry is ancient. Older than curses. Older than justice. The first seers were never loved. They were buried with their mouths open and their hands tied. I only see what's already there, Nyara said. What comes? I don't pull the string. But you let it snap. The wind shifted. The crowd watching from a distance began to murmur. The priestess rose slowly, brushing dust from her knees. Be careful, girl, she said. There's a difference between knowing the storm and choosing not to warn the village. Both leave bodies in the mud. Then she was gone. That night, Nyara did not dream of red threads. She dreamed of hands, hundreds of hands reaching from the ground, some tiny, some withered, all clutching toward her as she stood still. The next morning, the village chief came to her. He was a tall man, with skin like polished wood and a beard he oiled daily. He walked with a slight limp from a hunting injury long ago, but his voice had never faltered, until now. He bowed before her, deeper than most would have imagined. I need to know, he said. Nyara sat still. My son, he continued. He has been ill. Not with fever. Not with cough. But he sleeps too long. He says he dreams of water, of being pulled down. He wakes cold. Please, tell me. Does he have the thread? Nyara shook her head, not in answer, in refusal. I won't look. The chief's face tightened. If I offer coin. There's no coin that buys death's silence, she said. He stepped back, hurt flashing through his eyes. You let Bakery die. You knew. I only saw what was already walking beside him. And my son? Nyara's voice was firm. I don't want to know. He turned without another word. That night, screams tore through the chief's compound. The boy, 9 years old, had drowned in his own bed. No water. No basin. Just breathless, limp, and cold. The healer said his mouth was open, his lips cracked, like he'd been shouting underwater. By morning, the village was on fire with fear. They came to her not with stones, not with curses, but with questions. How do we stop it? What do you see in me? Please, look at my daughter. They knelt before her like one might kneel before a shrine, faces full of salt and tremble. Nyara stood among them, heart aching, throat hollow. She hadn't wanted this. She hadn't asked for their deaths, or their worship. She hadn't wished to become the place they poured their terror into. But the red threads were always there, humming, pulsing. She could not unsee. Could not unknow. And yet, was it justice if she only let it unfold? If she said nothing? If she simply stood by and watched the stones fall one by one? She turned from the crowd, entered the forest's edge once more, and sat with her back to the village, listening to the wind, trying to remember what silence used to sound like before she could hear how people died. The forest grew denser the deeper Nyara walked, its branches clawing together like hands keeping secrets. She had not meant to stray so far, but something in the air pulled her, a strange hum in the soil beneath her feet, a pulse that vibrated against her chest like a buried drum. The birds had grown quiet. Even the wind moved slower here. There was an oldness in this part of the woods, a breathless waiting. She walked by sound, by scent, by the taste of silence. Then her foot struck stone. She paused, crouched, and ran her fingers over the cool surface. A wall, old, sunken, and mostly hidden beneath vines and fallen leaves. She brushed at it slowly, carefully, until her fingertips caught paint. Eyes. Dozens of them. Painted in crimson and coal black, each eye different, some wide with terror, others calm, some with 3 lashes, some with none. There were markings below them, ancient sigils etched into the stone, now flaking with moss and time. Her breath caught. These were not God's eyes. They were human. Remembered. Recorded. She moved slowly along the wall, tracing each one, until her fingers touched a faded handprint pressed low to the ground. Smaller than the rest. Feminine. The imprint was still deep, as if whoever made it had pressed with her whole soul. Then she felt it, the pattern of beads embedded in the wall just above it. 7 circles. 2 triangles. Her hand rose to her neck instinctively, to the necklace she wore in memory, 7 small seed beads and 2 pointed bone fragments. Her mother's necklace. She had found Arifa's mark. Her knees gave beneath her, and she sank to the ground, her fingers trembling as she pressed her forehead to the base of the wall. It wasn't just a place of memory. It was a burial. A shrine. Not for bodies, but for sight. For those who had seen too much. And in that quiet moment, images came to her, not dreams, not visions, but something older, deeper. The forest shared pieces of its memory. Whispers in the dirt. Cries carried by stone. She saw her mother, younger, her eyes still bright, walking in white robes through the village, speaking softly to those who suffered. Arifa had once been a seer, not feared, but revered, her sight used to heal, to protect. But then she saw her sister. The masked priestess. Unmasked, her face was sharp, beautiful, stern. Eyes the same as Arifa's, only colder. She had once stood beside her, not above her. But something had turned, a fear, a rift, a power struggle. There had been a warning. A child was born, one who saw too much. A child with silver eyes. Arifa had begged them not to take her daughter. But the village demanded obedience. She gave up her own sight instead, offering her eyes in exchange for the child's safety. A ritual of fire. A price paid in flesh. They took her sight anyway. And so Arifa fled with her child. Nyara's breath caught. Her fingers gripped the earth. Her blindness had not been born from fate or curse. It had been born from betrayal. From blood. The very hand that pressed sacred oil into her eyes, the one who led the ritual and spoke of gods and vengeance, was not just a priestess. She was family. The masked priestess was her mother's sister. Her aunt. Nyara rose slowly, her jaw clenched, her shoulders shaking, not from rage, but from the sudden clarity that poured into her like cold rain. The village had twisted its truth, covered its crimes in rituals and incense. Her mother had died trying to protect her from those who wore sacred cloth and false holiness. She turned back toward Nyoka. But she did not walk as she had before. There was purpose now. She had seen the eyes beneath the mask. And she would not forget. The drums began long before dawn, slow, somber, steady. Not the joyful thrum of celebration, but the heartbeat of something older. The festival of eyes had come again. White cloth waved from the rooftops. Children's faces were painted in ash. Women plaited their hair in silence. The village of Nyoka wore its sorrow like a veil, and this time, no one smiled. They hadn't seen her in weeks. Some whispered she had fled to the forest for good, taken by spirits. Others said she had buried herself under the shrine, nursing curses. But deep in every throat sat the same unspoken truth. She would return. And they were not ready. By mid-afternoon, the air grew thick. Smoke coiled from incense pits as villagers gathered in a great circle around the central flame. The priestess had not yet arrived. But neither had Nyara. Children shifted uneasily. Even the wind seemed hesitant. Then a shadow stepped forward from the northern path. She moved like silence itself, veiled in black, barefoot, her head bowed slightly, as though listening to something beneath the earth. Every step she took caused heads to turn, breath to hitch. Her face remained hidden, but there was no doubt. They knew her walk. They knew her presence. Nyara had returned. She stepped into the center of the gathering and stopped. Her hands dangled at her sides, calm, patient. No words. Then she turned slowly toward the crowd and began to walk. One by one, she passed the villagers, not speaking, not pointing, only pausing. At a tall man with a heavy laugh, she placed her hand briefly on his shoulder. He swallowed hard. His wife reached for him, trembling. Nyara moved on. A child reached toward her, eyes wide, and Nyara knelt, touched the girl's cheek, and smiled faintly. The mother wept with relief. Another woman stepped forward, trembling, her arms outstretched. Nyara stopped, but said nothing. Then, with a sudden sharp turn of her head, she moved away from her. The woman collapsed to her knees. "Please," she begged, clutching Nyara's skirt. "Don't see me. Please, I want to live." Nyara did not reply. She didn't need to. Whispers rose like wind around fire. "She sees it in us." By the time dusk bled into the horizon, the crowd was thin. Many had fled. Others stood frozen, unable to move, as Nyara's slow circuit continued. Even the strongest among them, warriors, hunters, elders, looked away when her face turned their way. Then came the tolling of the ceremonial bell. The priestess had arrived. She entered not with grace, but fury, robes sweeping the earth like knives, her voice thunderous with chants of defiance. Her golden mask gleamed in the firelight, freshly polished, as though trying to blind the truth itself. "You dare walk among us, cursed girl," the priestess spat. "You twist the God's will with your tongue. This festival is for purity, not for fear." Nyara stepped forward, slowly lifting her veil. Gasps rippled through the crowd. There were no eyes. Only two smooth, empty sockets rimmed in pale skin. But behind them, light flickered. Not from within her, but from around her. The fire from the ceremonial pit reflected in her hollowness, like the eyes of the dead. Nyara raised her head and spoke quietly. "Beauty dies tonight." Then, lightning split the sky. It struck not far, but directly onto the festival shrine. The carved wood, soaked in sacred oils, exploded into flames with a roar that knocked many backward. Screams rose. The sky cracked again, as if heaven itself had opened its mouth. In the chaos, the priestess stumbled back, arms raised to shield herself from the blaze. But her mask cracked, a jagged line splitting it from brow to chin. She tried to remove it, but it clung too tightly. Then it shattered. Gasps turned to screams. For beneath the golden visage was not the divine face they expected, not the face of a vessel of God's, but the sharp, tired, aging face of a woman who had hidden too long. Nyara's voice rang out, clear and full. "Your beauty was borrowed. Your power was stolen. The fire does not lie." The priestess shrieked, clutching at her own face as the fire painted her in red light. She turned and fled from the shrine, her sacred robes ablaze at the hem, stumbling into the darkness. No one moved to follow. The crowd turned to Nyara, and this time, they did not run. They knelt. Some in fear. Some in shame. Some in reverence. She stood among them, unmoving, the fire dancing in the hollows of her face. The festival of eyes had always celebrated beauty, sight, vision. But tonight, it celebrated truth. And truth was fire. Nyara sat at the edge of the hermit's hut, her fingers pressed into the cool earth, her breath trembling with every gust of wind that passed through the thin trees. The scent of herbs and dying wood filled the air. Inside, the man who had once pulled her from the mud and wrapped her in silence now lay on a mat of woven reeds, his chest rising shallowly, his eyes flickering like the last coals in a dying fire. She had seen it before the others. In the curve of his shadow. In the way the birds avoided the tree near his roof. In the deep, pulsing red that had begun to hang around him like mist. Death. It clung to him with the patience of a lover. But Nyara wasn't ready. She brought him water steeped with crushed roots from the forest. She whispered prayers learned from her mother's tongue, and others she crafted from her own grief. She fasted for 2 days and nights, letting her knees collapse beside his fire, her blind eyes lifted to the stars, begging the ancestors she had never met. She made a circle of ash, of stone, of salt, and lay in it until her skin turned raw. None of it mattered. The red glow remained. She sat beside him now, her hands wrapped around his, which had grown thinner, colder. "I can see it," she whispered. "It's close. I can feel it crawling over your bones." The hermit chuckled softly, though the sound came out more like a cough. "You always were too honest, little ghost." Nyara's throat tightened. "I can stop it. I still have time." "No," he said. "You don't. But you're the only one," her voice cracked, thick with rising panic. "You saved me. You taught me silence when the whole world screamed. You gave me back my name." The hermit smiled, barely lifting his head. "I didn't give you anything. I just reminded you who you already were." Nyara turned her head away, though her eyes couldn't see. The wind had grown still. The forest held its breath. Her fingertips ached. "I see death now," she said bitterly. "But what use is seeing it, if I can't stop it?" He reached up, slowly, his knotted fingers brushing her cheek with the gentleness of falling ash. "You were not made to stop death, Nyara." She shook her head, tears spilling. "Then what was I made for?" His answer was so quiet, it felt like a thread pulled through the veil between worlds. "You were made to name it." She froze. He smiled again, and something inside him relaxed, not from pain, but from peace. "Let your blindness burn them all." Nyara didn't realize she was screaming until the birds exploded from the trees above, shrieking into the sky. Her hands clutched his still frame. She begged. She cursed. She whispered his name like a prayer that refused to be answered. But he was gone. The hut seemed smaller now. The earth colder. Even the red light that had once wrapped him like a halo had vanished. She sat beside him until night fell, and the stars blinked awake. The forest no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a cage. When she rose, it was not with grief. It was with clarity. She walked barefoot through the trees, past the edge of the shrine where the priestess's mask still lay shattered in the dirt. Past the village well, where women once washed silks now turned to ash. Past the festival square, still stained with soot and salt. She stood at the edge of the gathering place, blind eyes pointed toward the village. And the villagers came. They came not in song or celebration. They came because they had felt it, something had shifted. Something had broken free. She didn't speak as they gathered. She didn't need to. They saw it in the way she stood. Something in her had died, but something else had awakened. Gone was the girl who knelt before the mask. Gone was the child who wept for love or mercy. What stood before them now was something deeper, darker, older. The eye of death. She could still see the glow, in the villagers' shadows, in the way some flickered red like embers yet to be snuffed. And she would not beg anymore. She would not warn them. She would simply name what was already theirs. And when she spoke, it was not with malice, but with the calm, final tone of the storm before it strikes. "There will be no more mercy." The wind answered her. This time, it did not whisper. It howled. At dawn, Nyara stood at the edge of the shrine once more, the same one where she had first been blindfolded and broken, the same one where white silk and masked lies once danced like purity. But now, everything was cracked and blackened, scorched by truth and thunder. Smoke still curled at the corners of the altar where the priestess's mask had burned. She moved with a quiet purpose. Her bare feet stirred ash and broken beads, but she did not flinch. In her hands, she held the ancient pot, the one sealed with golden thread and dried serpent skin, hidden deep within the shrine's heart. It was said only royals could open it. That inside was the second eye of Nyoka, not a physical eye, but a vessel of divine sight and ancestral judgment. She placed it on the stone pedestal, the seal humming with restrained fury. The crowd began to gather behind her, villagers in tattered festival whites, robes now grayed with soot, eyes filled with unease. No one dared step closer. No one spoke. Nyara turned her face slightly toward them, her veiled eyes glowing faintly with a strange silver light. "This is the gift you kept for yourselves," she said softly. "Beauty for the chosen. Vision for the royal. You sealed truth inside clay, and called it holiness." Her fingers hovered over the seal. "You worshipped beauty," she said, her voice rising with the wind. "So I give you only horror." And with that, she broke the seal. The pot split with a sound like bones cracking under earth. Smoke hissed upward, not black, not white, but the deep, shifting gray of funeral cloth soaked in rain. It coiled into the air like a spirit unchained, and the ground trembled. A cry rang out, from the shrine itself. Faces turned pale. Mothers clutched children. Elders fell to their knees. But Nyara stood still, her voice now echoing unnaturally across the square. "From this day on, by the eyes of the ancestors who saw you laugh while I bled, by the silence of those you banished to the forest, by the breath of the one who died in mercy." She lifted her head. "Every mirror shall show you only your death." Gasps rose like a flood. "No more beauty," she said. "No more denial. Look at yourselves, and see what I have seen." And with that, the pot collapsed into dust. At first, nothing happened. Then the screams began. A woman stumbled backward, her bronze hand mirror clattering to the ground as she shrieked. Her reflection had smiled, but its throat was cut. A young man sobbed in front of a polished bowl, pointing at his own image, his body impaled by spears. A child cried out that her reflection had no eyes. One by one, terror spread like wildfire. Every polished surface turned traitor. Every calm pool of water became a window into fate. There was no escape. Panic swallowed the village whole. They smashed mirrors with stones. They kicked over bowls and shattered jars. They tore fabric from the shrine's walls and used it to blindfold themselves. Someone tried to gouge their own eyes out. But still, the visions came. Even behind closed lids, death whispered. In horror and madness, they turned on their own gods. They dragged down the shrine's pillars. They burned the last of the silks. The priestess's broken mask was crushed under bare feet. The Eye Festival altars were reduced to ash. By dusk, the village had destroyed everything that once honored Nyoka, the snake goddess of vision and beauty. And Nyara stood at the center of it all, unmoved. Not angry. Not triumphant. Simply, done. What was once a gift, the ability to see, had become their curse. And now, her curse was their mirror. Years passed, and the village that once worshipped mirrors lay forgotten, its shrine devoured by vines and ash. No festivals echoed through its square. No silk fluttered in the wind. Just silence, the kind that settles only after something terrible has happened. But the story did not end there. Far from the ruins, in towns that never knew her name, whispers began. Of a veiled woman walking barefoot through drought-choked fields. Of a figure clothed in ash-gray robes appearing at the edges of battle camps, her presence followed by sudden, unexplained deaths. They say she never speaks, only pauses beside those whose time is already unraveling. Those marked for death feel her stillness before they feel the blade or the fever. In one village, children fell ill. As the sun bled across the sky, a woman was seen by the well, her face covered, her hands resting gently on the rim of a water jar. She vanished before dawn. By morning, 3 children had died. The rest were spared. In another place, during a rebellion, soldiers told of a silent woman who moved through their ranks before the ambush. She touched a captain's shoulder. He died by an arrow minutes later. No one saw where she went. They began to give her names. Death's Daughter. The Last Eye. Justice in Ash. But to those who knew the old stories, the band tales whispered only at night, her true name returned like a ghost. Nyara. The girl who had once knelt before a shrine in a white veil. The girl whose sight had been torn away in the name of beauty. The girl who had walked back into her village with burned eyes and burning truth. Now she was something else. Not alive in the way others were, but not quite gone either. Some believe she is a spirit, bound to the veil she wears. Others say she is immortal, kept alive by the eye of Nyoka she broke open long ago. And some, only a few, believe she is simply a woman who sees what others refuse to. One wandering priest tried to follow her once. He marked her path through dust and salt fields, through graves and swamps, until the trail led him to a mountain. There, at its base, he found a shrine made of mirrors shattered and reassembled, not to reflect beauty, but endings. She stood inside, facing a mirror that showed no reflection. She turned toward him. He fell to his knees. "I am not ready," he whispered. She didn't answer. She only placed her hand gently on his chest, then walked away. He lived 3 more days. Now, her tale is carried in songs without melody, in stories spoken by firelight, and in the quiet dread before storms. No one knows where she'll appear next, but when the air grows heavy, and the wind carries a scent like ash and perfume, people begin to whisper. They close their mirrors. They cover their eyes. Because somewhere in the world, Nyara walks. And as the old ones say now, they took her eyes so she couldn't see beauty. But now she sees what kills.